Every 6 months or so, there is a flurry of media activity in response to the latest round of claims from activists that parental discipline in the form of smacking is violent abuse and the law should be changed to criminalise parents. If these claims are challenged, and they often aren't, they are defended on the grounds that the evidence shows or the research says or because experts, i.e. other activists, say that it's true. But is it? Well, the Christian Institute has now done research of its own asking the simple question, does smacking contribute to negative outcomes for children? Research that has found that the evidence cited as a rationale for locking up parents is limited, inconclusive, misleading, unrepresentative, contradictory, lacking causation, or all of the above. Now, as director of the Christian Institute, you might expect me to say that, but you don't need to take my word for it. Joining me now is Dr Ashley Frawley, sociologist, visiting researcher in the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies at the University of Kent, and the author of Significant Emotions, Rhetoric and Social Problems in a Vulnerable Age. Dr Frawley, thank you very much for joining me. You're one of 4 academics who put their names to the foreword of this review. Why?
I think it's really important that there's a challenge to some of the very biased and motivated research that gets propagated in the public sphere, and to challenge the claims that are made that say the science is settled. I think even if it were the case that the science was settled, this would not be a reason to call the police on parents. I don't think in a civilized society we should have parents knocking at the door saying, "Excuse me, we don't think that your parenting practices are scientifically have the adequate scientific backing." I think that is a very, very wild sort of leap to make. But nonetheless, it does appear to convince a lot of people that if the so-called science says that smacking causes negative outcomes, then it should be banned. I don't think that is the case, but that is what people are convinced by. And it's been very, very disheartening to me to see this, what is often advocacy research, very biased research that is done by people who want to see a ban on smacking be put forward as though it is simply the latest science on the subject. In actual fact, it has been this area of research has been subject to ongoing debate for over 3 decades, if not longer. And it's beginning now debates are beginning now to open up in anthropology, in other areas of social science, as we start to see the effects of this kind of highly motivated, very ethnocentric, that is, Western-centric research done mainly on American middle-class parents, the effects that this is having abroad. So if it is the case that smacking is child abuse and should be criminalized as assault, that means that the vast majority of parents all around the world, save for white middle-class Americans, are damaging their children. And we know the effects that claims like this have had on people around the world. I'm from an Indigenous background. I'm First Nations Canadian. And, we've seen decades of our children being taken away from us on the basis of claims that only white middle-class people are capable of raising their children properly. And that's the underlying subtext of a lot of this. And it just flies in the face of common sense, because the vast majority of people, even in Western countries today, were smacked as children. And the vast majority of people are law-abiding citizens who do not think that their parents were criminal abusers. And so we need some common sense, and we need to take a very good look at this so-called science, and to put forward the common sense and put forward a strong analysis of what the data actually shows, which is a very, very mixed picture. And it shows the difficulty of drawing causal associations between a single parenting practice and a wide range of outcomes later in life. We know, any social scientist should know that that is a very, very difficult thing to do. And people should not be making claims in the public sphere, particularly with such wide-ranging effects, such powerful effects on the family and criminalization, claiming that the association is clear and that we know this. That is not the case.
So how does this review help us? How does it help shape that debate? How does it help us? How does it help wider society understand the weakness of the data? How does it push back against this narrative that smacking is abuse?
This review looks very carefully at the claims and the major studies that tend to be cited as evidence of a clear association between smacking and a wide range of negative outcomes. And it shows actually that the associations are not at all clear. For example, smacking is the supposed negative effects of smacking are often lessened by parental warmth. And in fact, if you have a physically loving, gentle family that also uses smacking as a backup method, this produces positive outcomes. And it actually affirms some of the most well recognized research going back 50 or 60 years now, in particular, the research of Diana Baumrind, which has shown that authoritative parenting, not authoritarian, authoritative parenting is associated with the best outcomes. And authoritative parenting often uses smacking as a backup method. Now, in our society, people are quite squeamish about that. It's being used less and less. And I think we should allow parents to make that decision on their own.
Sure.
But that squeamishness, I think, is what's causing a lot of so-called parenting experts to disregard that part of the research. They will recognize that, yes, authoritative parenting is the most effective form of parenting. That is having a strong sense of authority as a parent, but also having some flexibility as well, and parental warmth and this sort of thing. They will say, yes, okay, that's good, but they will completely disregard that part of authoritative parenting because they just don't like it. And so what this research does is it really reaffirms what is some of the best quality evidence that we have, which is that authoritative parenting, that parenting that uses, that is affectionate, where parents, reason with the children, but also have put forward firm boundaries, so the child knows where the boundaries lie, is the most effective form of parenting. And that the research that claims this huge range of negative outcomes is often done on very small studies. It doesn't account for the behavior beforehand of the child. It doesn't account for the differences in child temperament, that there's just such a huge range of factors that research needs to consider. And it is almost impossible to draw causal correlations. And it's the same thing with a huge range of research in the area of parenting, where researchers with an axe to grind will often try to pick out one particular thing, the thing that they wish parents would do, and draw a huge range of causal relationships with that thing. We see this with breastfeeding research, for instance. But it is simply impossible to isolate that one thing that a parent does with the huge range of outcomes. It could be that the sort of parent that breastfeeds also does a whole range of other things, and the sort of parent who uses frequent smacking does a lot of other things. But we know that most parents, the vast majority of parents who use smacking, use it infrequently as a backup method, and it doesn't cause negative outcomes. And that just tells us what common sense told us, that the vast majority of our parents, that is what they did. And the vast majority of us do not consider, as I said, our parents to be child abusers that need to be put into prison. And the vast majority of us are decent, law-abiding individuals.
Quite. It's really refreshing to hear that take on it. I mean, in my introduction, I talked about the review finding that a lot of the data was unrepresentative, lacking causation. You've talked about causation and correlation. I wonder, just for the uninitiated, could you just perhaps briefly explain what those terms mean and why they're so significant?
Yeah, so a lot of junk science will use correlation because the public at large doesn't really understand the difference between saying something is correlated with something and something is caused by something. So I recommend people go and have a look at a wonderful website. Just Google spurious correlations, and you will find that if you have enough data on something, you can mine that data for all kinds of correlations. So you can find a correlation between like increased consumption of butter and margarine or something and divorce. So if you have enough data, you can find all kinds of spurious correlations.
Yeah, one of my favourite ones of those is I heard that an increase in the number of BBC licenses being distributed correlates to an increase in insanity in the UK over a period of time. And say what you want about the BBC, I'm not sure that's entirely true. I think the migratory habits of storks in the Netherlands also seem to correlate to the birth rate there. So yeah, we can find all sorts of spurious kind of correlations, can't we?
Yeah, so correlation just means that two things happen together, but causation means that one thing makes the other thing happen. But just because two trends move in sync does not mean that one thing causes the other. We can sometimes not know the direction of causation. It could be that bad behavior causes more frequent parental smacking, or it could be the other way around. It's very difficult to tell that. And, studies that have tried to control for that, well, there are actually very, very few studies that try to control for that, but also, they often studies don't control for things like mental health, and it's when it comes to social life, it's very difficult to parse causation from correlation, because there are countless hidden factors, hidden feedback loops, coincidences that can, mimic cause and effect. And when we're talking about a single parental practice and people trying to find outcomes down the line, sometimes only months, but sometimes years, sometimes decades, it's very difficult to draw a connection. However, you can draw a very quick causal correlation. And this is what the highest quality studies have found since the 1990s before activists put an end to this research. But in randomized controlled trials for oppositional defiant behavior, um, using smacking as a backup method was actually was highly effective, the most effective form of controlling that behavior. And that's not surprising. And that's probably why most parents around the world use some form of corporal punishment. And most countries around the world are very careful about how they exercise it. I think we need to understand that human beings are empirical. Human beings, they reflect, they think about the world around them. The vast majority of people do this on the whole, and they do what works within their cultures and within their milieu. And what we're doing is we are taking certain norms, particularly those norms from where this research often originates, middle class America, and we are projecting that onto the world at large. And we are making criminals of decent parents, parents who are doing what is right, what they think is right within their own situations. And I think, as I said at the beginning, having the police knock on someone's door because they're not using what middle class parenting experts in the United States think is the most effective parenting method is not a civilized thing to do, causes enormous problems, completely disregards some causal correlations that appear to be very strong, such as putting children in care,
Hmm.
having a parent that is charged with a crime.
Yeah.
These are really powerful negative outcomes, and we do a lot more damage trying to enforce, using the criminal law, a very specific parental norm.
And just a reminder for people that in England and in Northern Ireland, this law of reasonable chastisement that activists want to remove only allows for a very mild smack. Abuse, despite what people would say or try to say, abuse is of course illegal. And the idea about the police turning up at the door isn't scaremongering, because as we know, we have the data from Wales, that's exactly what's happening, as social services are seeing a massive increase in referrals. So you covered off there, Dr. Frawley, a bit about correlation and causation. Perhaps you could say something about the representative sampling or lack of representation in the sampling that's gone into the data that which purports to show that smacking is harmful.
Yeah, I've already mentioned how a lot of these studies are done in America, and that limits the ability to generalize. It's a strong finding from studies going back several decades that where the norm is to have parental physical chastisement, the people who are subject to that grow to be normal contributing members of their community. And so, where you are sampling from areas where it is becoming less and less the norm, that can skew the results. Um, in addition, there's an over reliance on minority groups. So, estimates on associations between smacking and outcomes can be disproportionately driven by things like, the socioeconomic status, the how poor people are, the other kinds of conditions that people are living in, um, other kinds of racial or ethnic disparities. Uh, all given inequalities that already exist are going to have a confounding influence on these things. And so, if you have a survey that has over samples people from a particular socioeconomic stratum, area of society and particular ethnicities, you're going to see the outcomes that of all sorts of things that affect those communities. And to say that those outcomes are due to something that those parents are doing, like one single thing, like smacking, is as a sociologist, it just really beggars belief that you could really just wipe away the enormous socioeconomic disadvantage and disparities that exist in those populations and essentially blame the parents for them. Um, and it's often, studies often narrowly look at already high risk populations, particular urban communities, adolescents in specific regions. And so it's in general, it's also very, very difficult to measure exactly what smacking is. Often studies will rely on self-reports. And so what that word means can be very, very different depending on the individual. You can be relying on just the parental recollection. You can be relying on how much the parent thinks it's a norm. So if in a middle-class community, it is considered uncouth to use corporal punishment, but the parent has done it, they may not report that. And so you might see better outcomes for those parents who are more likely to, be in a middle class community anyway and underreport their use of corporal punishment. So there's just so much going on. It is an incredibly complicated picture, a very, very difficult thing to study to begin with. And then it is absolutely complicated by the problems of the data sets that people are using.
Yeah, you in your forward, and I should just say that along with Dr. Frawley, Professor Frank Frady, Professor Ellie Lee, Dr. Stuart Waiton have also put their names to that forward. You say that many of the claims being made about smacking are more driven by a desired result than anything close to an objective or scientific study of parents and children. Now, you've talked about that quite a bit, but in a nutshell, are you saying that those who want to ban smacking are starting with that objective and then selecting evidence to support that conclusion?
Yes, without a doubt. And you can see this in the background of a lot of the people who are doing these studies. They're activists. They are involved in campaigns to ban smacking. So they're highly motivated to find results that they want to find. And they often do that by using very broad definitions. My main area of research is social problems. And this is a very common thing that activists will do, that lobby groups will do. It is in their interest to adopt the broadest definition possible. And so what they will do is they will bring together very, very harsh forms of corporal punishment that are already illegal and very light forms of corporal punishment, a light smack on the back of the hand or the back of the bum, and that will produce the outcomes that they want to find. But I mean, this is not evidence of the thing that they actually want to ban.
Okay, so I'm the director of the Christian Institute. This study has been put out by the Christian Institute. There will be people who are watching this saying, well, hang on a second, aren't you just the same? How would you defend this review, this report, from that same accusation that we just wanted to put out a result that we had already decided on?
I think if you look at long-term debates, you can see that regardless of whether people are motivated, if you look at the academic studies and look at both sides, you can decide for yourself what you think is the most convincing outcome. So there's been an ongoing debate between Robert Larzilier and these a lot of the people who are named in the present Christian Institute report. And it is true that scientists do have biases. Social scientists especially have biases and have motivations. But you need to be able to see the claims made on both sides in order to make up your mind. I am giving what I think is the best review of the evidence based on my understanding of it. I think that we've put forward a very, very strong argument and a very strong review of the evidence. But it is ultimately up to you to decide which side you find most convincing. And we simply cannot say, often science is used in a very unscientific way now. It's like as though it's sort of handed down from on high, but it is a very human thing. And we have to argue with each other. And I think what has happened is, particularly in academia, one side has attempted to win the argument, not by putting forward evidence, but by trying to shut the other side up, by trying to make it professionally risky to question their evidence. And I think that's a very unscientific and underhanded way of doing it. They have tried to make it, and I've had this myself when I've been debating people. They have asked why I have been allowed to speak. So if your evidence cannot stand up to scrutiny by people who disagree with you, then that is a sign that your evidence is not as strong as you think it is. Because if you think it is strong, you should be able to put it out there, and we should be able to have a debate, and that's what we're doing now.
Okay, let's finish with the principle that's at stake here. And again, you've woven that in throughout. Thank you for that. The principles at stake for parents and for children. Why, in your view, Dr. Frawley, were Wales and Scotland wrong to ban smacking, and why should England and Northern Ireland resist the pressure to follow in their footsteps?
I wanted to actually say something to cap out what I had just said a moment ago. Um, I'm not motivated by being like pro smacking. This is often the mischaracterization of the debate, where people will say like, I am in favor of beating children or something very, very silly. Um, it should come as no surprise to anyone that beating children is already illegal, so we don't need to debate that. I am influenced by my own background of being an Indigenous person and seeing children taken away from their parents in large numbers. And I want to warn other governments not to follow suit. That is my motivation. I think the bar should be very, very high for criminalizing people. And what people are doing now is they're using the law to attempt to change parenting norms. That is extremely dangerous. That has very, very bad effects. And we know that it has bad effects. That breaking up families has a negative effect. Criminalizing parents has a negative effect. Putting children in care has a negative effect. We know that. Um, so that is my motivation here. I think that those countries that have criminalized smacking have made an extraordinary misstep by taking activist claims and activist desires and using that to guide their law, and not caring about the effects that it has, particularly on working class and immigrant communities, on ethnic minorities, because those are the people who are under the most surveillance, and those are the people that fall afoul of the law. We've already seen this in Scotland and Wales, and everywhere where this has been put in place. It follows the exact same trends that we see in the application of the criminal law anywhere else. It is the poor, is ethnic minorities who suffer the most. And I even saw this during debates leading up to this criminalization, where a police officer called in to, I think it was a BBC debate, and he was worried that he might have to criminalize middle class parents. He actually openly said that. He was basically saying, normally I would only come down hard on poor people, but do I have to come down hard also on middle class people? So we know who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't. And that is my concern here. That you can have a debate. We can have a debate in society about the quality of the evidence around this or that parental practice. I think we should. I think we should have an open debate in society about parental discipline. Sure, convince people that what you want them to do is the right thing to do. But you do not convince people by calling the police on them. When you are accused of assaulting your child, that is not a small thing. That breaks up the family while the investigation happens, even if no charges are laid at the end of the day. We need to think about what we are doing here. This is very, very serious, and it goes beyond the evidence of this or that parenting practice, or how frequent the smacking is, or the that is a place for a different kind of debate. What has happened is they have criminalized a particular form of parental discipline that a certain stratum, a certain group in society does not like. That is really something else.
Dr. Ashley Frawley, sociologist, researcher, and author, thank you very much indeed for speaking to me today. Does smacking contribute to negative outcomes for children? Narrative review on the effects of physical punishment on children. A report from the Christian Institute is available now. It's on our website, christian.org.uk.
For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.